class. In this video, we're going to go over keyboard interaction, and we'll include some of the sound stuff that we covered in the last video as well. So we'll learn how to use the keyboard in a P5 sketch, and then in order to use the keyboard to interact, we'll trigger some different sounds. So I'm going to open up the keyboard interaction notes, and we'll kind of go through here. But I'm also going to create a new sketch and add some stuff in here as we go, so we can start to create kind of a little keyboard sampler. So I'm going to open up GitHub as usual and go to MMP 210, and I want to make sure that I'm up to date with everything. And then I'm going to open up in Sublime Text. So I've got that ready to go, and I'm also going to show in Finder. So I can see my project here, and we're going to be downloading some more sounds today. So I'm going to open another Finder window and have that open to my downloads folder. So if I download some sounds, I'll be able to move them from there. So I'm going to go to MMP 210 and take my sound folder. I'm just going to duplicate that. So I'll continue working with the music, and I might add some new sounds today. So I'm going to duplicate that folder and call this keyboard. And we'll kind of start from there. I'm going to make some changes, obviously, but we'll start to introduce some new stuff with the keyboard here. So let's add a link on our main page. So I'm going to open up index.html and scroll down a bit. And so this is kind of going to be closer to what the assignment will look like, the keyboard sampler. So I'll use that as the name for this one. This will be closer to kind of what the expectation for the homework assignment is. So let me add in my new list item, and we'll add in a link. So here's the href to keyboard, and we'll just call this keyboard sampler. So this will be the first version of our project. Next week, we'll make a visual sampler, so we'll be able to click on sounds instead of just using the keyboard. So I've got that all set up. So I'm going to go to Sublime Server, and it looks like I already have it running. You may need to start Sublime Server there. And so then I'll go to Chrome and open up localhost 8080. And go to MMP 210, and then open up our keyboard sampler. So that's loading the sketch from the sound example. We're going to make some changes here to use the keyboard. So let me open up the console to get started, and then I'll move back here. So I'm going to close this out, open up keyboard. I guess I could make this, name these things something similar so they sit next to each other, but that's okay. I'm just going to go to index.html and change this to keyboard sampler, and update this one as well. Okay, so I'm going to close out of index.html, open up sketch.js, and I'm going to start from scratch. It'll be easier in the long run. So I'm just going to delete all this. I can review how to load a sound. So let's just say this is the keyboard sampler, and the date is the 15th. And so let's just add in our sound to start, and then we'll go over the keyboard interaction. So I'm going to add in, I'm just going to start with my music. So I'm going to say variable music, var music. I guess I could have kept this. And just initialize that in the global scope, and then we're going to preload that. So music gets load sound, and I'm going to copy this again from my Finder so I don't have to type out the whole thing. So I'll just throw that in there. Okay, and then we will go to function setup, create our canvas. So 640 by 360. And then let's just start. Well, actually, let's trigger the music. So I'm just going to trigger the music. So I'll make a draw function just so we can see something. So I'll use the same thing we used last time with the background. I'll just say if music.isPlaying, then we'll draw, maybe I'll change the color. I'll say background is, let's say light green. And if it's not playing, then we'll just do something dark. I'll say background is 51. Okay, so we'll use the keyboard to actually trigger the sound. So now that we have this set up, we can talk about how the keyboard works. So I'm going to save that and then go over to my notes. So the keyboard interaction, the way it works is really pretty similar to the mouse interaction. We have keyboard events whenever a user either hits a key. It's sort of like the mouse where you can press the key down and then release the key. So there's two components to the keyboard event, the key going down and the key going back up. But what makes the keyboard more complicated is that there are a lot of keys. So not only do we have to know that the keyboard was pressed, we also have to know which key was pressed to decide what we want to do. We're going to use some environment variables like our key is pressed or the function key pressed as well. And then we're also going to use some logic to determine which key is pressed. So key is pressed basically just tells us whether or not there is a key pressed. And so we can see an example here where basically the background is white unless a key is pressed, in which case the background is plum. And so you can see here we're displaying the key is pressed value, so it's false. And then if I press any key, it really doesn't matter which key I'm pressing. It'll turn to pink. So you can try that on your computer. So if we want to decide which key to use, then we use the key variable. So like mouse X or mouse Y, this just saves a value that's constantly changing. Like mouse X moves as you move the mouse, key changes as you press different keys. So we can look at what key is being pressed here. So we're just visualizing different keys. And then certain keys like B will turn the background blue and certain keys will turn the background green. So here I'm saying if key is pressed right here. So then inside of that if statement, so notice that this if statement starts here and then it closes down here. So inside of that if statement, we have two other if statements. If that key equals B, so we can compare the key value to a letter. And if it's B, then we get blue. If it's G, then we get green. So let's take a look at that. So B, G, and B. And notice that the key stays on the screen even after I release it. So the color only happens if it's pressed, but the key value stays the same until we press another key. So we can also see if I hit capital B or capital G that doesn't work. So it actually knows the difference between B and capital B. Those are different keys. Even though it's technically we're pressing the same key, one includes shift. So to avoid issues with that, we can actually use keyCodes, which I'll go into later. So those are a couple examples. We have nested if statements. So just like our nested loop, we have one if statement inside of another larger if statement. So as I mentioned before, we don't always have to use the name of the key. We can use the key code. So this is a little bit more reliable because the key code knows all of the keys and it doesn't matter if they're lowercase or uppercase. So if we go to keycode.info, you can actually see all the keys and their codes on your computer. So A is 65, B 66, C 67, keeps going that way. 1 is 49, 2, 3, 4. So the keys all are kind of like grouped in these different places. And the key code, which is displayed right here, we can use to determine which key the user is pressing. So that's a little bit more reliable than using the key variable. So in this case, we can see the code for the enter key and the spacebar key. Enter is 13, space is 32. And so there's space. So 32, we're getting the green, and enter, we get the blue. So those keys obviously don't have letter values, so we'll just see that number key code. So that's a more reliable way to detect the key. Okay, so other than key is pressed, which just tells us whether or not a key is pressed, we can also use the key pressed function like we do with the mouse. And this is a better way to kind of trigger sounds because we don't want to be triggering a sound over and over again. So in this case, I'm just going to use the space bar to play the sound. In the example, I have this sound of chickens, which you can hear if you want to play it there. I'm just going to go over to my project and play it here. So I'm going to make a new function here, and this is key pressed. And if I just use key pressed, I can play the sound without worrying about what key it is. So I can just say music.play, and it'll just play the music. So if I reload my sampler and I hit space, so if I reload the sampler and just hit a key, so then it plays the sound a lot of times. So we want to avoid doing that. So the first thing I'm going to do is use this if music playing code. So we're going to end up with a couple nested if statements here. But so we'll play the music with the spacebar. So I'll detect that first. So I'll say if, and then we'll just say, is the key code equal to 32, which is the spacebar? And if it is, then we'll play the music. So now when I go back to my keyboard, if I hit A, which I'm doing right now, nothing happens. But if I hit space, then we'll play the sound when I hit space. So again, we want to make sure that we can play and pause the music. So I'm going to use this code that we had before. So we're going to have another nested if loop. I'm going to say if music.isPlaying. That's when I'll pause the music. So if it's playing, then that's when I can pause it. So I'll say music.pause. And if it's not playing, so else, then I'll play the music. So now I can turn the music on and off with just the space bar. So again, I'm not using the mouse, I'm clicking the space bar. Okay, so we can play our music, but we can also test for other key codes. So let's download a few more sounds and then we can kind of add them into the music. So maybe I'll make some sort of video gamey sounds using the JFXR. So I'll go to JFXR and I'm just going to make a couple sounds. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but you guys could spend more time on this if you want to get something specific. So I'm just going to do like a laser sound. That's pretty good. So I'll just click export to download that. I'll do a jump sound. Okay, I'll export that. And then I'll do a power up. That's a good one. So I'll export that. So I can really easily make sounds, and then to click the export, that will download the sounds here. So now I've got 3 new sounds that I can put into my keyboard folder. So I'll just grab those guys and drag them over here. And I have to load each one of those sounds. You can see that they have spaces in them, so I'm going to edit the sounds just to get rid of that. So I'm just going to take out the 3 and the space, 4 and space, and then the 4 and space here. Don't really need those there. If I had downloaded a ton of them, it would be good to have those numbers to separate them. So then I'm going to go back to Sublime and add these guys in. And then I'll continue to just look for different keys and add different sounds based on those keys. So I have 3 new sounds, and I'm just going to put these together. So I have they're sort of sound effects. So I have the jump sound, the laser sound, and the power up sound. And so I just need to load those. I only need one preload function. I'm just going to add these in under the music. So I'll say jump sound gets load sound, and this one is jump.wave. So just make sure that you have the same spelling and capitalization and spaces, etc. Or you shouldn't have spaces, but if you do, you need to account for it. Laser sound It's load sound. And that one is laser underscore shoot. It's a pretty good sound name. And then finally we have the power up. So I'll say power up sound gets load sound. And this one is power up.wave. Okay, so now we have 3 new sounds. And so I can assign those to any keys I want. I'm just gonna use the if key code again. So that's my background music. I'll put that here. So play music. And then I'll do some sound effects. So play sound effects. I do want to do else if here, just so I'm not like, okay, so now I'll play the sound effects. So I can use whatever keys I want. And if I have keycode.info open, I can see what those keys are. So I'm just going to use A, B, and C. Just to start. I could also use 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to use. You might also use keys that are near each other, like ASD or JKL, whatever you think is going to be best. I'm going to use ABC just because they're right next to each other, so or right in a row. So I'll say if key code equals A, 65, then I'll play my jump sound. So I'll say jump sound.play. And I'm not going to change the play mode for these guys. I might want to later, but for now I'll just leave them. So they'll just play on top of each other. And then I'll say if key code equals 66. And since we don't really know these numbers by heart, we might want to just put like a comment here that says A key, B key. That'll just make it easier for you in the future if you forget these codes. So then for the B key, let's play the laser sound. And then for our last one, if key code equals 67, that is the C key. Then we'll do power up sound.play. So pretty much the same thing, just repeating it with different keys. So let's reload. And so now I'll be able to play everything with just the keyboard. So if I hit space, and if I hit A, B, so now I can play the music and kind of play along with my sound effect. So that's pretty fun. That's pretty much how the keyboard works. There's not a whole lot more to go over. I am gonna add some more visuals in here because I do think it's really important that when you're using sound, especially interactive sound, that you have some visual cue so the user knows that you're playing different sounds. So I'm just going to make a simple visualization for each sound using this same code here. So I'll say if jump sound is playing, and I'll just draw something. If it's playing, if it's not, you know, we can leave it alone. So maybe I'll fill in some rectangles. So I'll say rectangle 0 to, let's say 0 is the height, 0 width height. I'll just make a few different bands, and then I'll say the width is 100 and the height is height. And let's give this a color. So I'll say fill is, let's say plum. And then I can just repeat that for each one of my sounds. And some of you might be thinking, oh, I'm repeating this, shouldn't I use a loop? And you're probably right. I could probably use a loop for this, but then I wouldn't be able to specify the different sounds and different colors. So there's not a lot of similarity, even though it could be, maybe, you know, when we learn some more stuff, we could do a loop here. So I'll do blue for the next one. And I'll do a rectangle. I'll just move it over a little bit. So I'll say 0, 0. Actually, I'll move the X over 200, 0, 100 height. So just moving the X over a little bit, leaving the bandwidth the same. And then our last one, if power up sound is playing. And this is another place where you could get creative, is you could add images here. So you could display an image if the sound is playing. The is playing is really a useful function because it'll allow us to draw stuff as long as the sound is playing, but as soon as the sound stops, the visual stops. So you could add images in here, you could add text. You could add other types of shapes, whatever you want to do. So then I'll do the last one is gold. And the rectangle, I'll move that over again. And let's take a look. So A, B, C. And let me turn off the stroke. I'll do that in setup. No stroke. So any drawing function that you put inside of these if statements will only show up during the sound. So if you have an image, another shape, whatever you want to put in here. So that's kind of fun. So play around with that. You can download some different sounds. You can download different music, whatever you guys want to do to create a little sound sampler with the keyboard. That's pretty much the assignment for this week. So obviously I want you to use different sounds than what I'm using. And I would like you to add some visuals as well. That's basically the assignment. So combine sounds with keyboard events to create a sound sampler, use colors or images to reflect the changes in the sound. So that's pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, just let me know. No limit to the number of sounds you want to use. I would say if you're just using one sound, it's probably not going to be very exciting. So definitely want to use more than one. I have 4 technically with the background and the 3 effects, but you guys can kind of think about what you want to get out of this and then add it in there. Another thing that would be useful here is some instructions because there's nothing on here that really says what to do. So you could add instructions either in the HTML or in the window. So maybe I'll add some instructions down here and just say maybe fill is white so it'll stand out. And we'll move the text size up a little bit and just say hit space A, B, and C keys for sound. So just a little instruction just to get people started with what they're supposed to do. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Okay, so just something to kind of prompt the user so they know what to do. So that's it for this week. If you guys have any questions, just let me know on Discord or email me. I'm going to upload this code on GitHub, so I'm just going to say adds the keyboard example and commit that. And so, of course, I'll include the links in the YouTube page, in the YouTube video description. So just look for those down there. And hopefully this will be a fun project.